As always, it's a great pleasure to host this seminar series, Topics in the Aesthetics of Music and Sound. My name is Cynthia Grund. I'm an associate professor of philosophy here at the University of Southern Denmark. And this week we have a guest with us from the University of Copenhagen. And her name is Rikke Platz Cortsen, and she will be talking to us about various kinds of Nordic comic strips and the way they deal with metal. But before we get to that, we usually have a quick round of introductions so that we have everybody on camera saying that it's okay that we use your image and audio in upcoming YouTube publications. So it's okay with me. And so maybe Johnny, you'd like to do your usual selfie and introduce yourself, and then we'll meet everyone else.
My name is Johnny Harboe. I'm a master in comparative literature here from SDU, and I'm very interested in metal music and very interested in comics as well. So I'm very much looking forward to this lecture.
Yes. So, so hi. My name is Vitus Vestergaard, and I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Southern Denmark at Media Studies. I'm also part of our small research group, and I'm also very interested in the visual side of metal. And actually, I have to leave a bit early because I'm giving a presentation about the visual side of metal to a museum club of senior citizens. So that would be interesting. But I haven't dedicated as much time and energy into the visual side of metal as Rikke, so I'm really looking forward to your talk on this topic. Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot about comic strips, and that's a very interesting angle.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Andreas Kiedus. I'm a PhD student at Media Studies, and I'm looking at the digital formats for music use, both the practical everyday use, but also which also contains the visual side of music. And this references a bit of the talk today, and I'm also interested in culture studies, and I read a lot of comics when I find the time for it. So all these things make me sit here today.
My name is Rikke Platz Cortsen, and I'm a PhD student at the Institute. And I don't know a lot about metal and representation of metal in comic strips, but I'd love to hear more and take an interest in cultural studies and visual representation as such.
Great, and Claudio.
Yes, hello, my name is Claudio Cifuentes Alunarte from Spanish and Latin American Studies. And I'm here because my tools for analyze the culture is the semiotic, and I'm very interested in the metal way to express the representations precisely. So maybe to define the way to take the conception of the sublime, because I have already worked about the positive sublime. So
Great, and we always have Claudio's permission to hear his voice and see his image. Thank you. And then we've just been joined by a guest from Finland, Toni-Matti Karjalainen, who many of you have met. And Toni-Matti, would you just like to say a word about yourself? 1 minute, we're having speaker problems. Would you mind saying that again? Okay, there you go, yep.
Yeah, hello everyone.
Yes, would you like to, hello to Toni-Matti, would you like to just say a word or two about yourself? And of course, we have your permission for your image and your voice, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm actually hearing my voice as an echo, but doesn't matter. Yeah. I'm from Helsinki, Aalto University School of Business, and I'm doing my own research on heavy metal, visual communication, branding, Finnish music export, and so forth. So I guess that's more or less the basic things.
That's wonderful. And several of us are looking forward to coming to the conference you'll be hosting this summer on modern heavy metal in Helsinki.
Yeah, that will be a cool event, and yeah, actually having quite many of you there coming up, so nice to meet you also in Helsinki.
And I have to say that after you posted your Facebook post about Nightwish, I listened to them for 80 minutes on my way coming over on the train from Hoyatostock to Odense.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well then, without much further ado, we should introduce our speaker, Rikke Platz Cortsen, who's with us from University of Copenhagen. The talk has a very interesting title, All Hail Pilse, the representation of metal in Nordic comic strips. And perhaps you'd like to tell us a little more about yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Yes, well, as Cynthia said, thank you so much for having me, by the way. My name is Rikke Platz Cortsen, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Copenhagen, where I'm currently working on a postdoc project on Nordic comics and how space and place is constructed and represented in Nordic comics. So I guess you can say that I did my PhD on time and space in comics, so I moved from time and space to space and place in comics. And I've read all sorts of different kinds of comics because I'm really interested in how they put together the mechanics of comics. I don't have a particular genre of comics that I study. So I'm working on Nordic comics, contemporary Nordic comics at the moment. And while reading through all these Nordic comics, I noticed that quite a few of them feature metal music in the strips or in the comic books in some form or the other. So I started collecting these examples and trying to examine exactly how is metal presented in these comics. So this presentation is part of a larger survey that I'm trying to do, which I haven't completed yet. So if you come across a comics from the Nordic countries and it has metal in it, please let me know. I'd be very interested. And then it's also to say that I haven't yet studied all the Nordic comics with potential metal content. I haven't found them all yet. And I know that in my abstract I promised to discuss representation as a concept, but I'm still working on that, so I'm not quite sure how that fits together with what I'm working on. So today I'll stick with representation and use Stuart Hall's thoughts on representation and culture to try to look at how metal is represented in comics, and then how perhaps also this relates to the larger field of metal culture. One of the things I've noticed reading through these comics is how black metal is very often portrayed. It's the center of attention, and it becomes the laughingstock of a lot of the comics. So it's very often a humorous thing that can be used to make jokes with in the comics. So I'll also be using Jay Grunstein, who's a comic scholar. He has some structural comics theory that I'll also use to try to analyze specifically how the comic strip called Blacktooth, it's spelled Blacktooth but with umlauts over the O's, of course, because that's a metal way of spelling. How the strip Blacktooth represents black metal culture. And then, as a final point, I'll try to compare it with a Finnish comic called Berkeros, which is a graphic novel, so it's a much longer format, in order to try to look at some of the differences also between formats in comics. But if we start with comics and metal, they're part of contemporary culture which have historically been regarded as marginal phenomena. And they've also shared a reputation of niche interest, possibly with a subversive potential. The many controversies surrounding both comics and metal came about through the same anxiety, I think, that concerned their potentially harmful influence on children and young adults. So metal and comics have fought some of the same battles. They've been involved in some of the same moral panics, and they are often used as signs of cultural decay. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but many popular films, if there's a teenager that's acting out, they're reading comics or they're listening to metal, and that's sort of how you recognize that there's something that's going wrong there. So they become these signifiers of something perhaps depraved or something gone wrong, specifically in children and young adults. And I guess a little comics history is also in order here, because in the 1950s, comic books were at the center of a pretty harsh moral panic in the US, which spread all over the world pretty fast. And it originated in the studies of a psychiatrist named Frederick Wertham, who had done some studies among children, and he concluded that the juvenile delinquents that he was examining and young offenders, criminal offenders, they had all read comic books. So this kind of causal relation then is problematic, because at that time, I think most children, both boys and girls, read comics. It was estimated that if you had one comic book, it had 5 readers, because the children would buy a comic and then they would swap them so that they could read more of the series. So collectively, a lot of children had read a lot of comics. And this kind of backwards causality that studied the criminal and the troubled children, then found that they had read comic books, became, I think you could say that the same kind of study could be made with children who were drinking milk, that they were also reading comic books. So if you drink, that all the children that were criminal had been drinking milk. So you could say, well, if you drink milk, then you'll also be criminals. So there's that, which was a big part of that debate in the 50s. And there were many other aspects of that debate. One of them was that there was an idea that comics made children bad readers, because they were so small text content, and the images, it made it easier for the children to read. There was also the communist parties in the European countries. They were concerned that the comics advocated American low culture, and in an anti-Americanism, they were very much opposed to the cultural import from the US. And then there was a big group of educators and parents that were concerned that the comics made the children into future depraved citizens, so that society was at risk because they were taught wrong kinds of ways to live through reading the comics. So all these were a part of this discussion, and I think, as many of you will know, this debate is one that's repeated itself over the decades, with movies, with video, television, computer games, different genres of music, rap music, metal music, that there's this connection with, concern with how it influences children. And I think if you look at metal, some of the same causalities have been part of the discussion. There was, I think many of you remember around the Columbine massacre, that there was this argument that the offenders of that they had been listening to metal, and that was possibly a reason for that massacre. Or on the other hand, in the case of the West Memphis 3, that the fact that they were listening to metal music was an incriminating factor in accusing them of the murder of children. So metal is something that also figures in this kind of discussion. And this is just to try to put together comics and metal and look at what are the similarities. So they do share these similarities in the sense that they've been perceived by the media and by parents and teachers, psychologists. In this way, there's this potential danger by reading comics or listening to metal, but they also share, I think, a reputation of the countercultural. So that's something that attracts readers and listeners. And in that way, both metal and comics can signal a positive value for many of their fans, because reading comics or listening to metal is exactly what sets you apart, and that in itself becomes empowering. So just to say, to sort of frame this, that all these connotations is something that feeds into the collective imaginary and influence how we understand metal and comics in a broader sense. But what I'm interested in here is how metal is portrayed and constructed in the popular medium of comics. And comics is both a narrative and a visual medium. So the question then becomes, how does metal look? How is it constructed as a cultural phenomenon? And what kind of stories are told about metal music in comics? And as I said, there's a lot of comics I could have studied for metal content, but as I began this talk by saying, Nordic comics is my field at the moment, and I think if you look at the metal scene and the importance of the Nordic metal scene for the general metal scene, it makes sense to just limit my examination, my study just to the Nordic comics, at least for now. And then as a final note, I thought I'd just say that in the connections between comics and metal, I'd like to say that the underground comics metal, the comics magazine Métal, which is the first issue is up there in the corner, in French, which means in French, if translate directly into howling metal, in English was named heavy metal. So when you talk to comics connoisseurs about heavy metal, it's a groundbreaking publication with a lot of sci-fi stories, fantasy, experimental comics, and in a magazine that hatched a great deal of names like Möbius, Inki Bilal, Milomanar, and in that way it's not a music genre, it's a magazine. So I'd just like to point that out. I think when we talk about these discussions concerning metal and comics and their supposed negative influence on youth and society at large, what is ignored is the complexity and the diversity of both fields. So in this way, the particularities of the comics medium and metal music in their different formats and different genres is overlooked and ignored, and sometimes there's a tendency to make generalizations, because I don't think you can say that there's something like a homogeneous, unified metal culture or a singular concept of comics. So I think so each of us might have an idea about what is metal, but it turns out to be much more multifaceted when you study it in depth. So when discussing representations of metal culture, I think maybe a word or two about culture and representation, and that's where Stuart Hall comes in, because of course he's pointed out that culture is a much debated term, and it can be considered in different ways. For once, he says that one way of thinking about it is the sum of all the great ideas as represented in the classic works of literature, painting, music, and philosophy. So that's one way of thinking about it. But then he says also that often this concept of culture is supplemented by another, where culture is considered to be, quote, the widely distributed form of popular music, publishing, art design, and literature, all the activities of leisure and entertainment, unquote. And in that way, it's also the creations of the human mind in many different, often artistic forms, whether that's high culture or popular culture. And then there's another way of looking at culture, where Hall offers versions from social sciences, where he says that culture is, quote, whatever is distinctive about a way of life of a people, community, nation, or social group, unquote. Or as the shared values of a group or a society, So that focuses on culture as the ways in which people interact and the way that they imagine the rules and premises for group coexistence. And so when I'm talking about culture here, it refers to several of these meanings. It's not just one of them, and my analysis takes place within this multiplicity of meanings, and in that sense, the complexity of metal culture is made of a great varieties of musical expressions, as well as practices, communities, fandom, and of course the cultural representations in the comics I'm talking about. And that takes us on to representation, because that's, when you say culture, that's a big concept, but also representation is a very contested concept. But I'd like to try to nuance it a bit, also furthering from Hall, because he says that, quote, representation is the production of the meaning of concepts in our minds through language, unquote. So he further emphasizes this, and he says that it's a result of a signifying practice, a practice that produces meaning, that makes things mean. So in that sense, when you look at something like comics, you're looking for the way that it constructs meaning, how it makes meaning. And he says that there are three different angles you can look at representation. You can look at it as reflective or mimetic, you can look at it as intentional or as constructionist. And for the reflective and the mimetic notion of representation, meaning can be found in the material that is being studied, and the representation is considered an imitation of what, of which the representation refers to. So when this representational position is employed in the study of comics, it will pay attention to the way in which the drawings or the speech balloons represent characters, places, conversations, in terms of likeness and reflection. So if you look at the way that, for instance, the metal heads in the strips look like real ones, or considering the dialogue, whether or not it reflects metal speech, would be the mimetic or reflective way of looking at representation. And if you look at a lot of the humor strips, particular newspaper strips, it's often humorous genre, and in that sense the mimetic representation will often be distorted, because they use caricature and very heavy, very excessive, expressive characters, and they're very central elements in the way that comics work when they're humorous, when it's a funny comic strip. So rather than an actual likeness, something that looks like real people, is one of excess. It's one that overemphasizes certain characteristics. And on the other hand, then, if we consider representation as intentional, it holds that the meaning that is transferred to the receiver is the meaning that is intended by the creator or the artist. So that reads the text in a way where you're looking for the meaning that the author has embedded in the text. And if you look at comics, then this approach interprets both the images and the text as something that has been deliberately arranged by the creator to convey the intentions, and then you look at the strips to pass out how this intended meaning is conveyed. And then if we take the last one, the constructionist approach to representation is founded in the idea that all human activity is social, and that meaning is something that we as human beings construct when we engage with each other and through our cultural practices, both as part of a community and in our use of the cultural products. So Hall underlines that, quote, constructivists do not deny the existence of the material world. However, it is not the material world which conveys meaning, it's the language system or whatever system we're using to represent our concepts, unquote. So the language system or whatever system, in this case, the system of comics. And in discussing how certain aspects of culture is represented in comics, using the constructionist approach, then we'll focus on how The meaning is constructed in a social field and reminds readers through the signifying system of comics. And looking at the comic strips, aspects of all three these representational approaches contribute to the analysis. And when you're reading Stuart Hall, he says that all of these three representational approaches play a role, but he mainly uses the constructionist approach. That's what he's mainly interested in. And I think, as my analysis will show, I'm along some of the same lines when it comes to representation. So when we look at comics in the cultural exchange of meaning, formats are significant in terms of the way that comics are received and how we perceive the content of them, because in terms of something like distribution, cultural respectability, commercial interests, and also the audience that the comics reach, there's a significant difference between a best-selling European album which is published in thousands of copies, and then a very small artistic publication which only reaches a select few, even if they share some of the same structural similarities. And in discussing how comics work, comic scholar Grund points to what he calls iconic solidarity. He says, iconic solidarity is interdependent images that, participating in a series, present the double characteristic of being separated, and which are plastically and semantically overdetermined by the fact that they coexist in presentia, unquote. So what is central to comics is the way that the panels are simultaneously individual panels and part of a sequence. So it has that double quality. And as such, the meaning that is created within a strip it emerges both from the single panel and the way that it connects to other panels. Panels like there will often be the small square windows. They can have the many shapes, but when we think about comics, they're often square with speech balloons and imaging. And in his theory, Grund also examines what he calls the spatiotopia of comics. Comes from the Greek space, place, and is interested in the size of the panels, the shape of the panels, where they are on the page, and how they relate to each other. And a lot of his structural comics and macro semiotic theory is about looking at how the panels relate to each other. And of course, when we look at the newspaper strip, it's a very restricted format. It's usually 3 or 4 panels in a line, so there's not much room for experimentation with these panels. But if we have something like the graphic novel, which is a term that's often used to designate a longer self-sustained narrative, which often also has artistic ambition in both the visual and the textual expression, then there's more ways in which you can experiment with how the panels are connected. And if we look specifically at the Nordic comics culture, the newspaper strip has enjoyed particularly popularity. It's very popular in the Nordic countries as a format. And throughout comics history, some of the greatest, most prolific and commercially successful comics artists in the Nordic countries have worked within the comic strip format. And it's a relatively constrictive format, as I was saying, because it has such a restricted area of space. It requires skill to capture places, people, situations very succinctly. And that's often done, as I also said, with amplified facial expressions, with symbols, and the reliance on the reader's familiarity with stereotypes. So we recognize the general shape of a dog, a woman, a man, but also fat man with protruding eyebrows. So the details, when they're overemphasized, is easier to spot. And in this sense, it's a mimetic representation, but it's the very, very exaggerated bodily features and overemphasized appearances that it doesn't resemble reality, and it doesn't relate to the object with likeness necessarily, but we can understand what it's supposed to look like. And then something else in terms of the content of the strips, because the newspaper comics is because they're published in nationwide papers and humor magazines. The humor can't be too specific. It can't be too exotic or rely on very obscure references, because then the readers won't get the joke. So even when it does so, it has to, it relies on the way that the content is diverging from the norm. There's something that we can see that this is the norm and this is normality, and then if something happens that is out of the order, then that can be something funny. And also because the strip has this economy where the first images are building up to the joke, and then the last panel often has, that's where you laugh. You have to put it together in a way where that is very strict. If you put the joke at the beginning, then the strip doesn't work. So there's something about how you can put the strip together in that way. So when looking at comic strips, it's important to both look at the iconic solidarity, how the patterns are forming across the strip, as well as the individual elements like speech balloons, the placement of characters, coloring, iconic and symbolic features, and the way that line and style is also something that can emphasize certain points in the narrative. In Norway, if we think about something like black metal, that can be raised as a cultural reference in the public sphere without problems, because the controversies surrounding the genre's musicing in the 1990s became front-page news. And that made the figure of the corpse-painted black metal fan very easily recognizable for the newspaper-reading public. And that brought along with it all the connotations of violence and church burning and general evil that was connected to that story. So if we consider culture as imaginations and practices and shared values in a group, black metal has become an integrated part of Norwegian culture. And national readers are familiar with it. And from the outside, it's considered as a particular Norwegian cultural phenomenon, even though it's a genre that's spread to many other countries. It's also associated with Norway. And in my research so far, I've read comics from the Nordic countries, and I've been looking for metal music or aspects of metal culture, like t-shirt prints, concert practices, other references that conveys a sense of metal to the reader, especially comics in which metal functions as part of the narrative, where it's a foundational, it's a ground premise for how the script works. And to give you an idea of how that might look, I brought along a strip from Frode Øverli's newspaper Pilse. It began in 1996, and it's one of the most popular comic strips in Norway, with several translations. It has a daily strip in the newspaper Dagbladet and its own monthly magazine. It's a strip about Pondus and his friend Jogge, and how they fare with women and work and other everyday problems, and big and small. And metal culture takes different forms in this strip. There's Jogge and Pondus, and they like to listen to Kiss and Judas Priest and AC/DC, and that's something that emphasizes that they haven't forgotten their rebellious roots and their attitudes they had when they were young, despite they've grown up, they've gotten families. And then there's the other form of black metal, which is black metal, and that's often made fun of in the series. Jogge owns a record store, and he has an employee called Zlatan, and he looks like a black metal fan, and he listens to very, very dark metal. There are several panels in the series where you can see just how dark and black the metal he listens to is. And here he is in conversation with one of his fellow metal friends. And for those who don't read Norwegian, It's, I can just translate it very quickly. Behold, O mortal, the new CD for Dutch oven massacre. By the cake of the Dark Lord, I've been waiting for that. Rumors on the internet say that it's even more evil than the previous one. Is that possible? The previous one was so evil, I bled from my ears and I slept with the lights on. Boom! This bodes well. Metal. So there's something in this strip that says something about metal culture, but also what it means to be metal, because that's the last expression. And it's a funny strip because it has this exaggerated visual language to convey the evilness of the metal. The way that it explodes literally here in the panel, in the way where even the frames of the panel sort of dissolves because it's so explosive, and also the very indicative, the skull-shaped black smoke coming from the CD. So that supports the idea that it's the evilness of black metal. But most often, the strip underlines perhaps how this evilness is not as evil as you might think. One of the strip, it's Zlatan on the far left from your side, and one of the strips tells about how he's heartbroken when he's buried his best friend's hamster, and the hamster's called Master Disaster. So there's this constant juxtaposition between being very evil and perhaps not being so evil at all, and there very often the black metal crowd in Pondus is shown to be perhaps a little bit cuddly and friendly, and they have a discussion where they're discussing something, and then Jorge asks Zlatan, "Is it true that you sleep in a Care Bear pajamas?" And he's like, "But it's flannel." There's these juxtapositions where it's constantly this evilness, this explosive evilness that's so evil that you bleed from your ears is constantly undermined in Pondus. And so that's a very popular strip, and the black metal element is just part of it. That's the strips with one of the side characters, Zlatan. But another newspaper strip in Norway is, and the one perhaps that most consistently features black metal as an object of poking fun of, is the Norwegian comics creator Torbjørn Lien's Kollektiv. And it's a strip which features a house where some very different characters live together as roomies, and one of the protagonists is Ronnie, and he plays in a black metal band called Blacktooth. And here is the front page of one of the albums, Kollektiv. The idea of Kollektiv is that you put very different people, very different characters together in a house, and then funny things happen. So there's the Muslim guy, and there's the lesbian, and then there's the black metal musician. There's other characters as well, but these are the ones that are shown here. And this is a strip just to show you how the strips sometimes look when they're in the newspaper. This is a strip where the people from Kollektiv have gone to Spain, and then they're partying. They're trying to party, at least with the locals, and they want to go to bars. Up here, the Muslim guy says, "Hey, there's a strip bar by Allah, let's go there." So again, these kind of juxtapositions of differing concepts. And but then what happens is that down here at the bottom, somebody shouts, "Blacktooth, you're Ronnie from the band Blacktooth." So Ronnie is recognized in the street in Spain by these two black metal fans. And what I think is interesting is that how, when you look at this, it's in color, and all the other different characters have different kinds of skin color, but the way that you recognize the black metal musician and the black metal fans is that they're white with black hair. And it's very obvious here when you can see all that. That's also how the fans look. This is the main strip, Kollektivet, which is about a lot of different kinds of. It's not about metal all the time, and this is one of the times where the band Blacktooth plays a role in Kollektivet. The thing is that Blacktooth became so popular when they made these little guest appearances in Kollektivet that they got their own strip, and there was a whole book with Blacktooth. This is the cover. And it says down here, "In sorte ridiculi," which is a reference to an immortal record. And but of course, ridiculi, also ridiculous, and underlining that one of the things that one of the connotations that this band has in the strips is that they're very silly and they're very ridiculous. And here they also, I guess it's also that the image is a pastiche of Immortals, the way that they do covers as well, but with a significant overload of spikes and different kinds of weapons, and also very significantly, I think he has, it looks like a round saw in his groin there at the back. So it's very exaggerated and overemphasized how exactly how evil they are. So what's interesting about Blacktooth is also that Kollektivet is a strip, but these pages where Blacktooth play when they have their when they got their own series is whole pages, and then often more pages, longer little stories about what these musicians are up to. And just to sort of look at what it looks like and what the connotations of how is black metal represented here. First of all, of course, there's the metalness, which is paratextually referenced in the way that the border of the comic is metal. Not metal music, but metal as in steel. But this is a comic strip where two women are walking along the sidewalk, and then all of a sudden they're met with this very fierce, very frightening black metal guy, and she just punches him in the face, and then he's winded with another punch in his stomach. So perhaps not as evil after all. At least two women are perfectly capable of handling him. And another thing that happens when the black metal dudes are trying to be evil is that they're just laughed out. And one of the things you can see here is that there's actually, like on stage, they have this smoke effect that crosses through the panels when they're trying to growl, be very evil, and he just starts laughing, and the laughter spreads, and the panel is shaped, the small little panel, so that all this laughter can just fill the entire panel, and the three Blacktooth members silhouetted, and you can tell from the symbolic emanata, the sweat that comes from their foreheads, that they're sort of embarrassed. And they're talking about down here that this is very depressing because they don't look evil at all, and it's hard times, and he's scratching his eyes because all the smoke got in their eyes, and they're sort of pathetic. And then what happens is, luckily, that it's not the smoke, it's the makeup, and they've gotten an allergic reaction to the makeup, and it's because it's this very cheap makeup. And then the point of view changes from we're looking at the band from the outside, and then we look at it from their angle, and we meet these people, and they look at the band members going, "Ah, my God, whoa!" And they're discussing here, and he says, well, it really hurts. And then at the back he's saying, but hey, people are really afraid of us. This is genius. So the fact that they have these horrible looking faces from their corpse paint. Yeah, allergic reaction to corpse paint, which is supposed to also be a signifier of being evil, is what really makes them evil. And here they're playing, and the audience here are talking about how, well, at least they sing and play with pain. And the guy goes, metal. And then one of them says, well, actually they're more like a freak show from a circus. So there's constantly this juxtaposition of they're really tough, they're really evil, or maybe they're not so much. Actually, they're very ridiculous, and if they're evil, they're only evil because they had this kind of accident with their face paint. But also, I think very interesting, as in the pandas example, the way that you throw the horns and you go metal, and then you're supposed to know what that means. It's indicative of something that's either cool, but it has all these connotation that comes with it that is not really explained necessarily. So of course, I think it's ironic and it's paradoxical that the members of Blacktooth, they're only able to be really scare their audiences when they have this accident. And I guess in the media and the popular imagination, metal is also often connected with Satanism and devil worship. And in the case of Blacktooth, this takes a very concrete shape because the band invokes an archdemon to help them out, and he's named Pilse, which translates into beer bob. But it's phonetically similar to Beelzebub, so it's demonic, but it's more like with beer thrown in. Beer bob. And then what actually also happens is that they invoke this demon. It's very evil, but he also gets tired of how stupid and silly they are, because they're constantly annoying him and they're doing all sorts of things, and it's not really cool to be their demon. And one of the examples is here, where this is Pilse. Usually he's pictured with a beer can, and then he comes in all this smoke and flame, and he says, okay, so you've called me, what do you want with me? I've had a devilly bad day. And then they go, well, we just wondered if you knew who's the most evil, Satanicon or Johnny Cash. And he's, what? Well, what's the better? And then somebody pulls him back into the flames, and Pilse goes back into hell where he came from. And there's this female demon. She's called Beelzebub, which is again this kind of wordplay with, because she's a woman, she's got boobs, but also Ilse is a very common Norwegian name. So Pilse is replaced by Beelzebub, and then she's really aggressive and says, well, so you're Blacktooth, and what do you want? And how dare you call up a demon? And they're like, well, we sort of know Pilse, and she says, he's history. Now you have to deal with me, Beelzebub. And what? Okay. And then they're like, well, we just wanted to know, which the better band. Is it Satanicon or Johnny Cash? And she's like, well, it's Cash, obviously. Any idiot who's heard a Ring of Fire knows that. So the whole point here is that they're supposed to be this evil black metal band that has a connection with the actual demonic, not the devil, but one of the demons in hell. And what they use them for is this kind of music quizzes, and it's not really evil stuff that they're up to. So it's a lot of these examples show that they're very stupid, they're very silly, they're clearly not frightening at all. A lot of the strips is about how they put on tight leather and then their trousers rip and they go half naked. And all these, they're always, the black metal thing in the strips is always something that is a source to be made fun of. So much so that even the demons regret that they've become their demon. And actually, then as I was looking at these different kinds of instances of black metal, it's clear that black metal is often something that's made fun of. And even also in the Finnish graphic novel Baccaros from 2013 by J.P. Ahonen and K.P. Ela, which is very popular in Finland, and it's already been translated. It's from 2013, but it's already been translated to quite a few languages. And that's a story, it's a longer format, it's a graphic novel, and it's a sort of a development story where the guitarist Axel and his avant-garde metal band, they try to get by and they develop their music and they get their first gigs and things like that. And when one of the very first scenes is where they look at a black metal band performing on stage. And one of the things you can notice here as well is how the layout plays a big role in how they're portrayed. There's of course a very big panel, and it says Satan. And something like coloring, the way that the audience are positioned in the panel. Also, he transgresses the borders here. His spit and his tongue is out. He beats himself on the face with the microphone. It's all very black metal. But what is also clear in this example is that this is the Finnish version. So what she says, Axel and his friend Lily, and what she says in the English translation is, "We'll take these guys down. Even the devil himself couldn't save these apes." So there's obviously they're not very good musician, but there's also the question of the lyrics, because even though it looks very evil, it's black with this white Gothic lettering. When you read it, it's sort of a parody of how evil lyrics are supposed to sound, because he sings, "Swallow his fury into your heart. I'm not worthy of thy bestial bulimia, your diarrhea of plague." So it's this, we take some evil words and we take some nasty words and we put them together, and then we have diarrhea of plague. And how evil is that? It's more silly than evil, really. So this is black metal in Bergeros, and of course, what actually then, some of the later pages after this scene, the black metal musicians are also relieved to be male chauvinist. They're very vain. One of them spills beer over his costume, and he's like, "Oh, you ruined my outfit," and things like this, where they're constantly also shown to be not musicians in the same way as Axel and his band. And in a plot twist, the story moves from being this everyday Bildungsroman comic to horror fantasy, when it is revealed that it's actually the band that's capable of conjuring up demons with their music is the indie band called Diablotus. So here the different genres within metal play a role in the way that the readers perceive metal culture. The black metal, which is supposedly evil, is not evil at all, and the real evil is the more indie-like bands, because they actually turn into demons, and then the avant-garde metal band has to fight them. So there's all these distinctions where you can tell that there's a sort of there's a valuation of the different genres here. But if we look at, so this is black metal, and if we look at what it looks like when Axel plays with this band, there's definitely, the layout has changed, the panels, they're diagonal, they're much more dynamic. There's also transgression here between the guitar crosses over the panels, the hair goes. There are different kinds of coloring and music notes everywhere. Very dynamic, very expressive, and also something which I think is very interesting in terms of comics and metal, because you have to convey the sense of something auditive in the visual. So this is how the music sounds like, the way it looks. So but you can see that it's very differently structured from the way that the other band is portrayed, which is much more structurally regular. And so we've seen Pondus, we've seen Blacktooth, we've seen Bergeros, and I guess I can sum up some of the things I've been saying here. First of all, the thing about that, humor comics often rely on stereotypes, exaggerated expressions, iconic features to convey their jokes, and black metal musicians fit this perfectly, because you just have to draw their spiked leather clothes, corpse paint, then it's an easy reference, we know what it is. And then there are all the connotations that follows, the whole evilness of the culture, something that is, it's a thing that you can use to make fun of. For Torbjørn Lien, Blacktooth is an almost, black metal becomes this bottomless reservoir of jokes that can be accessed on how their stupidity and the silliness and the way they're performing, and they're constantly be targeted as pathetic or self-important, and also very far from being truly satanic. I've also shown here how the comics use elements from metal culture which are recognizable to a broader audience, and at least in Norway, but also to some of the other Nordic countries. And specifically structural elements like color, page layout, panel form and size to express this sense of metal culture. And I think what I'd like to stress is that comics like these influence the common imaginary, so it adds to the way that metal is perceived outside of its practices, and the way that they look is a big factor in how readers and how they understand the metal in the stories. In the language of Stuart Hall, all these meanings are created in the collective and is found through the constructionist view of representation, although I think it's certainly possible to argue that the intentional view can be traced in the attitude towards Blacktooth that Torbjørn Lien has. His way of looking at black metal shines through in the way that they're treated in the comic strip collective. And I've just looked at a few comics here, but it's obvious that metal is not just one culture, and that the different artists can attribute very different values and qualities to metal, depending on which kind of effect that they want. In Pondus and Collective, black metal is a phenomenon which is a good joke, just like fat women, hairy women, lazy fathers, horny men, all these kinds of stereotypes that is the material for Pondus and Collective. And while black metal is also made fun of in Perkeros, the metal that Axel plays with his friend is something liberating, empowering, and it's also visually set apart from the other bands in the story. And in these strips, metal is it's not a culture in the sense of the best that has ever been made, but it's a community, and it's of importance how it's conveyed through the form and the graphic novel. So there's a difference between the strips that has this very restricted spatial distribution, and then the possibilities of making larger layouts. This is a page from a spread, so it's 2 pages that are folded up. It's a very large page layout. So I think that's as much as I have today.
Thank you very much. Tone Mackley also says thank you. He just had to leave a few minutes ago, but he's been with us the rest of the time. Okay, shall we open the floor for discussion? Since you have to go early, Vitos, maybe we should have you go first.
Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. It was so interesting. I was wondering, do you have any examples where metal is portrayed in a very serious manner, or is it always with the twist of humor?
Well, I think that's. I think that also has to do with format.
Yes.
And I think that because Pondus and also Nemi, I've also studied Nemi and Collective, they're humorous strips in the newspaper.
Sure.
So that's something about how genre connects with format.
Yeah.
And I think that's also one of the reasons why Perkeros is a little different, because there is funny elements in that, but it's much more serious.
Yes.
in the sense that it's also about how he wants this music so bad that he loses his girlfriend because he's so into metal, and how he's also misunderstood by when he tries to socialize with his girlfriend's friends when they come over and they have dinner, and she says, "Could you put on something, a little some music?" And then he says, "Yeah, sure." And then he puts on Type O Negative.
Right.
And that's sort of shown, and she's like, "No, no." And first he asks, "So I could put on the Sugar?" And she's like, "No, Downbeat." And then he puts on Type O Negative.
Yeah.
The thing is that he's set apart from the norm, and he chooses that, and that's portrayed as something that is empowering, and he ends up being able to, when the twist happens and it becomes fantasy and all these demons comes from the music that is being played by some of the others, he's the one that fights them, and he saves his band member. And so there's something in Pacados which is where metal is much more serious in the sense that it's so important to his life that he has to make a lot of sacrifices to be able to do what he wants, which is play music. And I think that's something that's also different from something like Pacados and perhaps Nemi and Pondus, where the characters there, they listen to metal. It's something they put on the record player, they go to concerts or something. But Axel is a musician, so I think that's a difference too as well.
Right, I see. Yeah, yeah. And, okay, thank you. And another thing I was wondering is, I know you've been focusing on Nordic comic strips, so the question might be a little bit unfair, but I was wondering if you've considered the portrayal of Beavis and Butthead, because when I think about the first time I saw someone who was represented as being a metal band. I know they're also more than that. They also listen to other kinds of music. But I mean, when they really like something, then they throw the horns and they're headbanging. And so I guess they were one of the first representations of drawn representations of metal fans. So do you see any similarities between Beavis and Butthead and what's going on in Nordic comic strips?
I guess if you think about Beavis and Butthead, there was definitely an element of MTV culture.
Yes.
That MTV, when MTV got big, it was sort of a youth culture, and something like Headbangers Ball was a different audience than the other music videos on MTV, but it was about a youth culture. And Beavis and Butthead, they did all kinds of crazy stuff, but it was also, when you watched the show, you watched it because of the music that they showed. That they also showed metal very often, and if you were into these kind of genres.
And I was one of the things I was wondering about with Beavis and Butthead was that in a way they had, I don't know if they had good taste, but they had taste, and what they often did was that they criticized music for being, or a music video for being ridiculous. And then some music videos, they just liked them a lot, and then they threw the horns and they started headbanging. But oftentimes they were sitting and really being critics and actually ridiculing a video. And I also remember them ridiculing some metal videos for being over the top or something like that.
Yes, so I think there's also something there in the way that when fans liked Beavis and Butthead, it was because they were against the norm, and they were subversive, but they were also, as you say, they were music critics, and you could get your take on videos from them.
Right.
And I think if you compare that with something like Blacktooth, it's not in the same way. They're much more ridiculous, and I guess for me it's hard to see what their potential is.
Right. I see. Yeah.
They're not in the sense that they're very stereotyped. It's they kill a goldfish.
Yeah.
It's well, I guess it's kind of hard to explain, but I think maybe maybe Beavis and Butthead also had an attraction to certain audiences, and I think actually also people like Blacktooth a lot. That's why they got their own series.
Right.
But I'm not sure that they liked them because they just wanted to be them.
No.
In that kind of way, because they are very pathetic, but they do a lot of funny stuff. Right. And actually, I forgot to say that, but Joe and Dean did transferred Blacktooth into the real world and made a black metal track called Night Sweat Agony. You can YouTube it; it's out there, and it's I haven't been able to find out with who's playing it, but supposedly it's a real black metal band that played a number. And then, of course, the lyrics is about how horrible it can be when you sweat in the night.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of agony, but night sweat. So again, this kind of double-sidedness.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I just want to shoot in a question to both of you, because I was checking on my iPad to see how the dates worked out. And Wayne's World actually predates Beavis and Butthead. How much do you think Wayne's World played in all? That's from '92. Beavis and Butthead are from '93.
Yeah, and they listen to Alice Cooper and
they sat in their parents'
They're the ones, they do the same thing here, right?
Yeah.
This is an intertextual reference, I guess. We're not worthy.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's Wayne's World. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a circulation of metal cultures in the popular culture.
Yeah.
So the reader of this kind is meta people, or
I think that this strip is in the daily newspaper. So
Okay.
the readers is everybody.
okay.
And so I guess if you don't know any metal, what you think is funny here is just like, this is how metal people live and this is what they do. But I guess if you're a metal fan, you recognize some of the references, or you relate to this, to the what goes on the content in different ways than the regular audiences. But what is also interesting is that something like Nemi or Pondus, that they have strips in the regular newspapers for all their regular readers, which are not metal fans, but they have metal characters, and they're just Nemi is the main character of the whole strip. But it's not. That's because it's not just about metal culture. It's also about being the odd one out, trying to relate to relationships. A lot of general material, and a lot of the humor is not from the metal, but it's the general premise. But I think. I guess perhaps in Norway it's not as exotic as it would be some other places, because this culture has been much more
expanded.
Yeah, and exposed to it's much more in the popular imaginary.
Yes. I had the impression that it was a producer from the metal world to the metal people, metal culture people.
Yeah.
And so it was possible that it was a very big part of self-irony, and I couldn't imagine that it was possible.
I think that's probably why they got their own strip and why they became popular, was that perhaps because of the self-irony. But that I think that also, and I don't know this because I haven't done audience studies, and I think that could be interesting to do and go and ask the readers, but that the everyday reader of the newspaper would not see it that way. They would just see okay. Also because perhaps because the black metal was so big in the 1990s, and it was true and it was real, and they were burning churches and there were people getting into jail and killing each other. That has have to be a reality for the Norwegian people, if you can say that, in a different way. So perhaps there's also, I don't know, maybe there's a point in making fun of this culture, because that takes some of the seriousness out of it.
Yeah, sure. The kind of the construction of this seriosity in a way.
Yes, because here they're harmless. You know, the Black Jews, they could never kill anybody or burn down a church. So that's a way of circumventing something that was a real event in the culture.
And they became represented as with a kind of naivety when with the comments, so funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, isn't there almost a kind of connection with something like Hagbard here? I mean, the Vikings also were pretty tough characters, you know, but in Hagbard they always are rather hapless, and the female character will come and ultimately, you know, bang Hagbard over the head and whatever. And my point being that there is, it seems, a comic tradition into which this is sort of inserting itself, of, you know, otherwise tough and scary characters who in reality are.
It's a way. I think it's a humorous. Would you say? So it's a way of. It's one of the ways that humor have is contrast or surprise. Something that you think, okay, so they're supposed to be evil, but they're not. That's surprising, and that can be funny. So I think that's a trope in humor that is, you know, you can. That's not just metal, but metal is just. I think the thing is that because the black metal appearance is so extreme and so radical and so easy to reproduce.
Well, as you point out, it's perfect for the.
They're almost caricatures sometimes when, you know, when you look at an immortal cover or something.
But for use in a comic strip, they're almost, you know, tailor-made, as it were. Questions and comments?
Yes, well, I find this very interesting to see how the subject of being a band can be so productive in a comic strip, or at least it piqued my interest a lot to see these comics. And I sort of wondered, and you might have touched upon it, is Lien or Ahonen themselves part of a metal community?
Yes.
Are they perhaps lovers of the genre?
Yes.
How to what extent can you read their passion about a genre or sort of membership of the genre from the manuscript or from the comics themselves? Is that even possible, or do you have to go to biographical
I think there's, I guess
material?
that's where when you do the biographical reading, you can sort of cross-reference. You can see that.
Yeah.
But I think even, you know, if you don't know about what is Torbjørn Lien's background and what are Ahonen and Alar's background, you can tell that there's a force in metal that is being taken seriously in a different way, I think, in their work. And it has a creative potential in a way where it's, I guess, to some extent it only serves as a gimmick for someone like Torbjørn Lien. And I think also if you go to something like Pondus, there's a difference between the black metal, which is sort of funny, and then the Judas Priest and the Kiss, because that's what, and I think you can sort of see there that if you go to the biographical reading, that Frode Øverli is probably much more of a Kiss fan than a black metal fan. That they're in the way that the characters, the way that they interact, that it's of course it's a source for fun when they're sort of singing along to the songs when they're vacuum cleaning or something, and they're still sort of metal, even if they're vacuum cleaning, but not in the same way that Zlatan is cute and funny, even if he's black metal. So I think there's also a difference that you can say, and actually in terms of turning the comics into music, both Nimi and Pondus have done tracks. So this is what you should listen to this is what the characters listen to. And Pondus is definitely, it's Kiss, it's Deep Purple, it's not black metal bands.
Yeah.
And also, the black metal bands that are in Pondus are fictive. They're not, so the other bands are bands that the rest of us have listened to and we can relate to, but the black metal bands is like, you know, you see here, Dutch Oven Massacre. You know, that's made up. And there's a lot of made up, and it's all about making them sound stupid but dark or very evil, explosively evil. And actually also, if you notice here, the way he's holding the CD, Dutch Oven Massacre gets shortened, and then his finger, so it actually spells dumb, stupid. So that's so there's these little cues. There's also there's an episode where Zlatan has a T-shirt that says "Dumme Bio," which is stupid Bio, but also phonetically sounds like Dimmu Borgir, the black metal band. So there's this kind of it's not he's not listening to actual bands in the same way that the others are. So there's a slash between real and imagined there, I think. That is much more funny to make up silly names for black metal bands.
It shows some of the love as well from the authors to this genre, I guess.
Yeah.
Having
I
such
think
a
also
profound knowledge of it and being able to play on that. What you,
yeah. And also that's a reference that you probably won't get if you don't know anything about it.
So in conclusion, we can say that the representation in this way is a kind of not negative, but dismystified object. Is not so terrible as you can suppose.
Well, I think there's a difference between the different kinds of formats, and I think there's a difference between the different kinds of comics. And I think what it boils down to is that you can't just say that this is how metal looks in comics.
Because already the genre comics is a caricature. So the caricature has in itself a kind of not ridiculization, but a kind of humor.
And I think that's also, I guess, if you broaden it out and you say comics, there's a lot of different comics. And humor comics in newspaper strips is just one. And if you look at, I don't know, that's why I'm still hoping to find the comics drawn in a different way, in a different format that treats metal in a different way. But the ones I've found so far are mainly humorous strips. So.
I'm checking here as we sort of come to our conclusion to see if they're available in English.
Mini is available.
Harboe seems to be available in Spanish and Italian and French.
And English. It's called Sing No Evil in English.
It's called Sing No Evil, okay.
That's why it's, you can see it here on the list.
Sing No Evil, yeah, okay.
It's here. Sing No Evil and Packers. So,
just thought we should point this out for anyone who's watching this who might want to investigate it.
It's a very interesting book in that sense.
Thank you.
I have a final note. As you said, the genre or the basic comics or the variety of comics, the format of comics is really diverse. But couldn't it be interesting to look at it from the music perspective? Find examples of bands that use comics in their self-representation, perhaps in covers, in websites, in fan art, in any sort of way where they take themselves seriously or less serious using comics. Because
and I think
that could be productive, I think, looking at
that's
comics.
The next step. I guess I would like to expand this so that it's just not the Nordics. That's where I started, because that was where I was working. But also, of course, once I've started looking, there's something like a band like Kiss had their own comic. Alice Cooper had a comic he made with Neil Gaiman, The Last Temptation. So there is definitely examples of the cross-pollination between metal and comics. So I've been looking at metal in comics, but there's definitely metal comics
metal,
and there's definitely the other way around as well. And I think that's where if you go back to the beginning of my talk, where I'm talking about what is the similarities, and there's the sort of the rebelness, and there's perhaps also that, at least from my very unempirical study, the people that I know that a lot of the ones that read comics also listen to metal. There's a crossover there perhaps sometimes. That of course, when Kiss makes a comic, they know that their fans will be enjoying that.
Sure.
But their fans would probably also have liked if they did a cartoon, or if they did an animated movie or a movie about. So it's about the band, not about the cultural form.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I think one of the things that has impressed all of us who are part of this research project on metal is the multimodal nature of metal culture, and well, you know about the exhibition here in Odense, but this takes it to sort of another level, as it were. I don't think we've really ever looked at the humoristic side of it, and I think the fact that there is such a side already says something about how the genre has matured quite a bit, because I don't think that something like this could be self-ironic, and if it felt somehow the necessity to take itself very seriously in order to be taken seriously, as it were. So this is quite fascinating.
Probably also something about the different genres. I think there's definitely fans of metal that will not like the way that metal is treated in some of these comics because they're being ridiculed. So I think
really?
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know, but
That's
you would have to ask some of those fans. But there's.
But if you had to say something that's potentially a bit, what should we say, dangerous now, which genre would you predict perhaps didn't have as much of a sense of humor about it all as...
I'm guessing that at least if you're very serious about black metal as a genre, and in the way that it's important for the performance to have corpse paint, and you think of the way that the seriousness of and some of the values that some, I don't know, bands or practitioners would associate with it. I'm not sure if that sort of at least relates to the way that Blacktooth is constantly being ridiculed. But I don't know.
But on the other hand, the band Immortal, every black metal fan knows Immortal and thinks that Immortal are so true or whatever.
But also funny.
But also funny and very camp, and
very camp.
Their music videos are totally ridiculous.
I think it's.
And they do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And act up and act
so
like
I'm
beasts
guessing
and
that's.
so on.
It's a question of whether you take it seriously or take it at face value, or if you recognize some sort of campiness in it. And I think that's very much also what the comics, some of these comic strips highlight, is that sense of theatrical, spectacular, which is, and also I guess that the culture is sometimes seen as they're setting themselves apart. But if you noticed all these, they all look the same. They're all wearing the same clothes and the same corpse paint and that kind of thing. So there's also that, making fun of the way that the culture is sort of.
You use the word camp now, and I mean a word that comes up time and time again in our discussions is carnivalistic. I mean, doesn't this also point in that direction as well? Yeah.
And I guess there's also, I think there's much more to be done, both with further comments, but also with these comments in particular. So I'm still
really look forward forward to seeing and hearing what you come up with. You have, how many more years do you have on this particular project?
Well, my project on Nordic comics is, I still have 2 years left. But of course, the metal is a very small part of that, because it's about how space and place is constructed in comics. And so one of the ways that I was interested in looking into it, how Nordic is this?
Right.
But then that sort of, I got a little bit away from that when I started to actually look at the comics.
But have you come to a conclusion as to how Nordic it is?
Well, not really, not yet, no.
Well, we'll be very interested in hearing more about that. So we'll look forward to having you back when you've had a chance to look into that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.